Welcome to Negotiating Ideas. This is Omar, Sadr, your host. Here's a question that I wrestle with consistently. When a regime systematically violates human rights but answers to no one, what does accountability even mean? I ask this not as an abstract academic exercise, but as someone who taught political science in Kabul, watched the Republic of Afghanistan's collapse, and now observes the Taliban's reconstructing Afghanistan into something unrecognizable. Every week brings new edicts, another category of people erased from public life, another space of freedom closed, another voice silenced. But here's what haunts me. Are we just documenting the decline, building elaborate records of injustice that no court will ever prosecute, or something more tragic is happening, a long game of accountability that most of us don't yet see? My guest today has spent 4 years thinking about exactly this. Richard Bennett serves as a UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan. A title sounds bureaucratic until you understand what it exactly means. He's an independent investigator with a mandate to document Taliban abuses and build case for accountability, and even when accountability seems impossible. What makes Richard's position unusual is its independence. He doesn't report to any country. He doesn't answer to the Taliban, and isn't constrained by diplomatic niceties. His job is to tell the truth about what's happening in Afghanistan, whether or not anyone wants to hear it. And for 4 years, he has exactly done that, producing reports that don't just catalog violations, but name patterns. Gender apartheid, systematic cultural erasure, weaponization of religious authority, destruction of civil society. His work has helped establish what's happening in Afghanistan isn't chaotic violence. It's a deliberate social engineering. But what I want to talk with him today is not to rehearse the horrors of what we already know, or to produce another depressing litany of Taliban's crime. And instead, I want to understand the machinery of accountability itself. What does his mandate actually accomplish when the Taliban ignores international law? Because here's what frustrates most of us about conversations on Afghanistan. They either oscillate between two equally useless pools. Either it's a theatrical outrage, look at these atrocities that produce nothing but emotional exhaustion, or it's cynical resignation, nothing can be done, that excuses inaction. Richard's work exists in neither spaces. It is methodological, strategic, and builds on premise that accountability isn't a moment, it's a process. International Criminal Court didn't prosecute Yugoslavia's war crime in the week after Srebrenica. The architects of Argentina's dirty war weren't held accountable under decades later. Justice is slow, but documentation makes it possible. So today's conversation is practical. How does a special reporter actually work? Now, Richard, thank you so much for accepting this invitation, and welcome to Negotiating Ideas.
Thank you very much, Omar, for your invitation, and I'm truly delighted to join you in this conversation. And thanks also for the very interesting and important introductory remarks.
You're welcome. So let me ask you the first question, probably a bit philosophical. What does it mean to work on a country where the notion and idea of human rights itself is contentious, being irrespective of now whoever is governing, but the very fact human rights has been contentious in Afghanistan, like many other societies probably. But what does it mean for you to work in such challenging country?
You know, I think that we often talk about Afghanistan as being a diverse country, and diversity in many ways. Of course, we normally think about it as linguistically, ethnically, sometimes religiously, culturally diverse. But it's also diverse in its approach to human rights. I would say that some of the strongest advocates and supporters of human rights that I know anywhere are Afghans, including even now in Afghanistan.
Sure.
But there's also a history of deep skepticism, and that perhaps lies in two areas. One of them is that somehow human rights is a Western invention that has been introduced into Afghanistan from the outside, and it's not kind of homegrown, and also maybe not consistent with Islamic standards. And the other idea, I think, is that it's not very practical. That it often it's just pushing on issues like accountability that are very hard to achieve and that they don't make immediate change. These are not unusual in other countries as well, even I think in neighboring countries to Afghanistan in some degree. So there is a tension, and human rights and indeed international law as a whole are under a lot of pressure. We only need to look at, a couple of the biggest, or maybe the three biggest conflicts in the world right now: Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan, to see terrible human rights violations and ignoring of often of international law. But I guess my question would be that, well, what is the alternative?
Yeah.
And the alternative is to have no international rules. And what does that lead to? It leads often to brutality and no chance of accountability. So I always remain optimistic, and I think that change and hope is important. Afghanistan goes through different changes. If you look historically, it swung back and forth between more open and more closed societies. And on this question of human rights being something imposed and Western, I do think it's important to have a decolonizing critique of Afghanistan. It's appropriate. But I would also point out that human rights is also embraced in Islamic countries. We can think of the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights. We know that the Organization of Islamic Conference has a human rights commission. So there is, I think a lot of these arguments are actually quite weak.
That's right. And you mentioned on another dimension, which is practicality. Some cynicals may suggest, well, it's good to have accountability, but it's a long process. So somehow they create a sequence where they put political and strategic issues on top, and then normative issues like human rights on subsequent level. And it's happening on the ground as well. For example, in European countries, when you see the most over 20 countries in Europe, they expropriate the immigrants and refugees back to the origin country, like Afghanistan, irrespective of situation of human rights. So again, how it's challenging in a situation where the countries that you expect that they should at least observe and respect international law and obey these norms, they also prioritize politics over human rights.
They do, but that's not necessarily either the right, the legal, or the moral approach, or even the effective approach. I think that whereas the current international system, international legal system, and the architecture was set up after the Second World War, and Europe was very influential on that, and the EU was formed. I think these days, the center of gravity for human rights and democracy is actually moved south. The countries now that I think are showing leadership are in the global south, in Africa, in Latin America, sometimes in parts of Asia. And perhaps we could see that as a positive thing. I also think that these countries from the global north will regret the phase of conservatism that they are going through. And we're beginning to see some glimmers of hope already. We saw just a couple of days ago New York electing a very progressive mayor. So I think things change. At the moment, I think the leadership is coming from the South, and without these agreed standards, without some kind of multilateral system, everything becomes a bilateral trade-off. Some like that. In many countries, they prefer to do these bilateral trades. But I think that that it's a kind of short-term issue, and that in the longer term, we need to strive to reach common ground on standards and values.
That's right. So now let's jump to your own mandate. You were appointed on October 2021, so it's almost over 4 years. And last month, on the same day, November 6, October this year, United Nations appointed another international mechanism for accountability. So tell us about, first of all, what does your mandate exactly means? What are certain limitations? And in terms of Thailand, of course, your mandate is clear that it's looking at post 2021. But each year, by the renewal of your mandate, provides you a new certain time frame and thematic issues. So tell us about how is that happening?
Yeah, actually, you're right, the mandate was established in the Human Rights Council in October 21, but it took about 6 months to select. In fact, I was selected, but to go through that process, so I only began on 1st of May 22. Maybe I'll just run through just to remind the listeners and viewers of what a special rapporteur is and what my mandate is. Then I'll come to the other issue of the new mechanism that was established a few weeks ago. So special rapporteurs are part of the UN Special Procedures System. We are all designated as independent experts, and that word independent is very important. As you said in your introduction, we are not UN staff members, and we do not report to any country, nor do we report to the Secretary General or the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We're appointed by the 53 members of the Human Rights Council, the member states.
And you're not paid by the UN staff?
No.
Right.
The UN system is required to provide staff support, that is some resources for support staff, and travel is covered and all of that, but I do not receive a salary.
That makes you more independent. So you're not even financially.
That's the idea. There are no financial incentives, and I report only to the Human Rights Council. And my reports and statements are not vetted. They're not. No one is screening or editing out from the report. So they are presented as I would want them. I'm not the only one. There are around 13 countries who have country mandate holders, and then there's another group of thematic mandate holders. So the thematic ones might be like violence against women or people with disabilities, to give a couple of examples. And Each mandate has a specific framework. So I'll just go through what the mandate is for mine. It's to report on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan and to make recommendations to improve it. I'm also required to assist in fulfilling the human rights obligations arising from international treaties that Afghanistan has ratified. I'm required to engage with and support and advise civil society to integrate a gender perspective and a survivor-centered approach and a child rights perspective. And then I have what I'd call an investigation mandate. I am mandated to document and preserve information about human rights violations and abuses in Afghanistan. And I can seek, receive, examine, and act on such information from all relevant stakeholders. So that's what formally the mandate involves. It's ideal if I can travel to the country concerned or the countries concerned. And I was traveling to Afghanistan, but 2 years ago was my last travel, because after that, the Taliban told me that I'm not welcome to come again. That has not prevented me from continuing the work, because using various technological means, I can engage inside Afghanistan and receive information from Afghanistan. And in fact, I have noted that there's maybe even more willingness to share information with me. And that is not unusual for mandate holders like me not to be able to visit the country. My counterpart in Iran cannot visit. On the other side, Myanmar cannot visit. There's a rapporteur on Russia. She cannot visit. So it's not unusual. It's much more desirable. And I am hoping that the Taliban will review their position because I make my reports anyway. And my mandate is renewed annually, was renewed a few weeks ago, and it was renewed by consensus. There was no vote, which means that all of the countries are supporting me. So what I would do is say, well, look, all of these countries support me. Taliban may not agree with what I say, but they should take it seriously. And it would be better to be able to come and have discussions in Kabul and in other parts of Afghanistan, and for me to continue to be able to see for myself. Now, I think the other part of your question was about the new mechanism. So for several years, there's been a advocacy, particularly by civil society, for the establishment of a stronger investigation mechanism on Afghanistan. And at the Human Rights Council last month, the resolution on Afghanistan included the establishment of an independent investigative mechanism, which will be ongoing and which will have a broad mandate, meaning that it can look at the current situation, but it can also look back. It can look back into history. And its mandate is mainly to investigate and to gather information, gather evidence at a criminal standard of evidence, and create cases and create files that could in future facilitate criminal prosecutions. And those prosecutions might take place through the International Criminal Court or through individual countries that exercise what is known as universal jurisdiction over Afghanistan. So that's the difference. It's not really an overlap with me. I do not create files for prosecution.
Yeah.
I create information about the human rights situation to inform the public and to inform the states who are members of the United Nations about the situation and to make recommendations to how to improve it.
That's right, and so that's why it's a huge, step forward towards accountability, in a sense that the independent investigative mechanism is not a trial, it's not a court, or it's not a chamber, but as you said, it's just documents and collects documents, and which will probably support probably ICC or ICJ or any other tribunal which may happen in future. It may also support any other independent states which might apply their own universal jurisdiction to put some of these criminals into the court. So,
Exactly.
but so which means that your work complements probably, then they can use some of your reports and information that you have provided, but it does not overlap necessarily with your work.
No, I mean, it's not yet functioning, so it will only be when it's operational that we will know for sure how it will work. But at least on paper, looking at the documents, it doesn't appear to overlap. It appears to complement. And also, I would note that what I do is try to look at a broader context. I may produce, this year I produced a report about access to justice for women and girls. I produced a report about the law and the ministry on the promotion of virtue and prevention of vice. I may do other thematic reports. And I look, but this other mechanism will focus more on cases.
Sure.
So, as you probably know, it's very hard to prove a case in court, and you are looking at the evidence around individuals.
Yeah.
But it also, if we're looking more broadly at the situation in Afghanistan for human rights and the future, then we need to understand the broad context. What is going on in education? What is going on in the health system? What is going on in the justice system? What is going on with the media? What is going on with marginalized communities, ethnic and religious minorities? So that's the role that I play.
Yeah. In terms of, you mentioned about how thematic reports you have also produced. So how is that coming along? So is it you in consultation with other stakeholders, including civil society, which eventually you will decide this year we are going to produce on this particular topic, which might be relevant due to some of
Yeah.
the events happening, or it is directly mandated by the Human Rights Council to requesting you to produce a report on this theme?
Yeah, it's both. So last year, the Human Rights Council directly requested me to produce a report on the PVPB law, and also another report on women and girls' access to justice and protection. So I did those.
Okay.
This year, they've recently asked me to write another report on situation of women and girls from intersectional perspective, and they left it quite open what the subject was. And I've undertaken some consultations with Afghans inside the country and outside, I think even with you and other colleagues. And I've decided to write or to research and write about barriers to access to the right to health. So that's what I'm currently working on. I'll be calling for written submissions. When I did the one on justice, I got 193 submissions from inside Afghanistan, so people in writing, and then another bunch from outside Afghanistan. So I hope that this next one on right to health will also elicit a similar number of submissions.
In your recent report, which was published a few weeks ago, you also mentioned, as you mentioned now, that the regime does not respond to your inquiries or to your reports or any kind of letter that you are sending, the completely dismissal or silent on it. But in documentation or in gathering information, you do rely on certain sources, which is, for example, public by the regime, for example, on corporal punishment or implementation of any other form of hudud and qisas. So, is there any other means in this situation where regime is not responsive at all to get in touch with the regime at all, or it's not important once they are dismissive?
No, it's important. And I mean, you're right. The regime does publish some relevant material, and including on hudud and qisas, that is published, and we use that. But whenever I write a report, and I did it for the last report, and I'll do it for the next one, I write to the Ministry of the de facto Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I say, this is my subject. And here's some questions. And I'm grateful if you could respond. Recently, they haven't responded, but they're not only ignoring me. For example, the CEDAW committee, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, also reached out and requested inputs, and they didn't get inputs either. And I'll also note that the International Criminal Court has issued 2 arrest warrants for Taliban leaders for the crime of gender persecution. They have not visited Afghanistan. So you can even collect evidence to the level where an arrest warrant is issued without necessarily having the cooperation of the Taliban. Cooperation is better, but it's not essential. The work can still be done.
Sure.
Yeah.
Apart from this, so what are other challenges in front of your work, emotionally, logistically, and any other means like financially to
Well, I
support your
mean,
work?
I think what we've been talking about in terms of logistically is access is not easy, not just for me. I think if you look at other human rights organizations that monitor Afghanistan, UNAMA and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and Rawadari and others, they all say it's quite challenging to do human rights research, monitoring, and reporting on Afghanistan. So logistically, it's challenging largely because of the priority to do no harm. Means that often people who are witnesses or have information are worried that if they are exposed, there will be costs because of the threats of reprisals, often from the Taliban. Or people associated with them. So that makes it more challenging. It's not just the physical access, it's the atmosphere of fear that has been created in Afghanistan. So people are reluctant to speak out. There are still some very brave people who do so. But it's not easy. And also, as you're aware, I'm associated with the Rav Wallenberg Institute, and we have research fellows who do research, including inside Afghanistan, but we have to be very careful. They have to be very careful. So there are these logistical challenges. There's also logistical challenges on resources because the UN is short of funds. And so even though they voted to give me a certain amount of support in terms of staff and travel and all of that kind of thing, is less than it should be. It's less than the member states agreed. So I'm always struggling for those kind of resources. And then emotionally, you mentioned, and it's the emotional difficulty is maybe is feeling that how challenging it is to make a difference. And this is both at the structural level and the individual level. Of course, individuals reach out to me who are suffering and want support and want to somehow that situation to improve, and they are really in pain They're really suffering mentally and sometimes physically as well. They've been ill-treated. All women and girls are in that situation because they've been so badly treated in Afghanistan. So there is this kind of feeling of not being able to do enough to meet their needs and their expectations. The other is, and you raised it in your introduction, which is, how do you make a difference? How do you deal with a regime that believes that it's right, that does not want to negotiate or change its ways? What tools are on the table at the moment in that respect. And so that's also at times an emotional struggle as well, because the expectations to deliver change are quite high. And what we have managed to do is get these accountability mechanisms established. I don't take credit for them, but there's the ICC now. Maybe the ICJ will get involved. There's the new mechanism that's been established. There's been a People's Tribunal recently. All of these, I think, are exposing globally what is happening in Afghanistan, and laying the groundwork for long-term accountability. But then there's also the question of what do we mean by accountability? And when I did my research on access to justice, we asked one of the first questions that we asked Afghans is inside the country and outside was, so what does accountability mean to you? And accountability was partly, yes, we want a criminal process and we want people to be punished for their crimes, but it was also, we want access to education, we want to work, we want freedom of movement, we want a better economy so that poverty is reduced and we can put food on a table for our children. That was seen as justice and accountability as well. Equality, no matter who you are, is a very high value on the grounds of gender, but also on other grounds like ethnicity or whether you have a disability or you are LGBTI. That was also a part of accountability. And the bottom line from many we spoke to, many Afghans, was we want the restoration of human dignity for all Afghans, and that we feel that has been taken away from us. And so whatever it takes to restore our dignity is the most important kind of justice.
Truly, because at least philosophically, human rights is built on the foundation of human dignity. The core of human rights comes, and this is across cultures and religions and civilizations. So no one, even within the Islamic community, will reject that while dignity of human beings is violatable. Now, it's very clear from your statement that you have been in touch with very different segments of society, from civil society to academia to diaspora communities and those who are inside in Afghanistan. But the very sensitive issue would be, how do you handle information which is provided by interlocutor inside Afghanistan? You referenced that how it is an atmosphere of fear. And in that atmosphere of fear, trust is quite important, which definitely you have built it because people reach out to you, provide you information. So tell us, how do you build that trust, and what are the mechanisms that you keep that sensitive information, which is coming from very probably vulnerable actors and individuals?
Yeah. So I think, that as I mentioned, confidentiality and making sure that we do no harm is one of the highest priorities. And so we guarantee that if someone provides us information, it is in confidence and it will be kept confidential. We have a very, I would say, advanced system to ensure that information cannot be accessed. It's a UN
I
It's a
think, yeah.
system that's used in other parts of the UN, commissions of inquiry. I
Uh-huh.
expect the investigative mechanism will use it, and the ICC as well.
Okay.
So that's one thing. People can trust that the information will not be used. But I
Uh-huh.
also have to do public reports, and
Yeah.
my public reports are stronger when I am able to express the voices of Afghans in my reports. And if you look at my reports, I quote Afghans from inside the country, and then sometimes I say which province they were from.
Yeah.
But I do that without any other
Main.
identifying
Yeah.
information, names. I may say, this was a woman from Kandahar or from Takhar or something, but I won't go any further than that to identify them. And I get their permission to use that quote in a public report. So it is a balance. Everyone can give testimony confidentially, but at the same time, some people want their voices to be heard without being identified. So we do both of those. There's also something that's much lesser known. It's not very well known. It's something called special procedures communications, which are basically formal letters that we send to a government. It can be any government, but including the de facto in Afghanistan, where we set out how we think human rights has been violated, and we ask a set of questions around a particular situation. And the person can disclose who they are, but they don't have to disclose who they are. And so these letters are in private, but they are usually made public after about 2 months, 60 days. So that's another thing that's available to people if they want. It's like a complaint that they can make.
Yeah.
It's called a communication. So I think that's it.
And to not hold you for long, just last question on what I mentioned in my introduction is that people sometimes dismiss work on human rights as being long, and it's normative, it's not immediate, it's not practical. So, to those audience, how will you articulate that? Well, human rights is normative, but at the same time, it is strategic, it's important, it leads us toward accountability. So, what would be your final words for such kind of audience?
Yeah, I hear this a lot. And in a way, there's sometimes a tension between at least three perspectives. One is more of a political perspective, which I think you've kind of very well articulated. Um, we need to find a solution, and we need to do whatever it takes to do that. There's the human rights perspective,
Mm,
which is saying, yes, we agree, but it has to be based around certain principles and standards that pragmatism might just lead to short-term results, and in the long term, we'll get back to where we were. And then there's also the humanitarian approach, which says, well, this human rights is okay, but we're delivering aid to save lives, and if we don't have time to think about these human rights and accountability issues. And by the way, if we start advocating around that, then we may no longer be able to deliver the aid. So we have these different perspectives and tensions. I think the bottom line for many human rights people is we have these set of global standards. Afghanistan has signed up to most of them in 7 different human rights treaties. And following those will lead to more equitable and better outcomes around equality and around accountability. But it's not always easy. It's quite tempting to be pragmatic. But I think there's a role, and sometimes it takes a long time. It doesn't always have to take a long time. We can see changes happening quickly at times as well. Some things could be done very quickly. Allowing women to get education. Could be done overnight. But of course, bringing someone to a trial and holding them criminally accountable, well, that will take a long time. So I think it's a mix. But I would really ask people to reflect on what are reasonable expectations. Often things don't change overnight, and we could have a discussion about why doesn't the international community do more? Why doesn't it intervene? Now, what do they mean by intervening? It's been tried militarily. It was tried, didn't work. The whole idea of this kind of occupation by the internationals, it's been tried more than once in Afghanistan and didn't work. It just does more harm.
That's right.
So I think we have to learn from those lessons and figure out ways where Afghans can be in the lead. And they must, all these discussions have to be inclusive, and that international standards and members of the international community can be in support. But the future needs to be inclusive. It needs to be based on a belief in equality and fundamental human rights.
Well, this has been quite enlightening conversation, Richard, for me, and I'm sure for many of our listeners. Thank you so much to you to give us a time to sit and speak with us. And I would also like to thank our audience for listening this, and I would request them to circulate this. Please, Richard.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you to you for inviting me for this very interesting conversation. And I also would like to thank your audience for taking time to listen. And if they have questions or even if they have criticism, please send it my way. Maybe I'll end with that in a way. We can all learn. We can all do better. We should be open to other ideas, including critical ideas. And that is for any government, including the current regime in Afghanistan. The way forward will be to listen, to accept different opinions, and to rather than imposing one view, to find a way forward with more agreement from a diversity of voices.
With that very inspiring words, I hope those who are responsible should listen to this and adhere to it. And I thank you again.
Thank you so much, Omar. Always great to talk to you. Thank you. Have a good